Most people believe they are in control. They believe their choices are independent. Their opinions are self-formed. Their direction is self-determined. This belief feels empowering. It creates identity. It creates confidence. It creates comfort. But Machiavelli would ask a quieter question. Not whether you have freedom, but whether your freedom operates inside boundaries you did not design. Because control rarely announces itself. It shapes behavior silently. And when behavior is shaped long enough, it begins to feel natural. You wake up at a certain time. You pursue certain goals. You adopt certain beliefs. And you rarely question why those goals exist in the first place. Machiavelli understood that people do not move according to abstract truth. They move according to incentives. Incentives shape action more reliably than morality. More reliably than intention. More reliably than identity. You may believe you chose your path. But look closer. Which options were rewarded? Which options were discouraged? Which options were never presented? Control does not remove all choices. It narrows them. And narrowed choices still feel like freedom. Consider education. You are told you are choosing your future. But your future is limited to predefined tracks. Certain careers are praised. Others are dismissed. Security is rewarded. Risk is quietly punished. You internalize these signals. You call the result preference. But preference is often trained. This is not conspiracy. It is structure. Structure defines the possible. The possible defines the acceptable. The acceptable defines the normal. And the normal feels natural. Machiavelli observed rulers, not philosophers. He saw that lasting control does not rely on constant force. It relies on predictable behavior. Predictable behavior emerges when incentives are stable. If speaking out risks exclusion, most people remain silent. If conformity brings opportunity, most people conform. The system does not need to threaten you daily. It only needs to make deviation costly. Cost is powerful. Cost regulates behavior quietly. You are free to refuse. But refusal carries consequences. And consequences shape compliance. Over time, you adapt. Adaptation feels like maturity. But often it is alignment. Alignment with expectations. Alignment with norms. Alignment with structure. And alignment feels safe. Safety reduces resistance. Resistance is the beginning of independent thought. Machiavelli would say people trade control for stability. Not consciously. Gradually. Comfort becomes the exchange currency. Approval becomes the reward. Reputation becomes leverage against you. You protect your image. Because your image determines access. Access determines survival. So you regulate yourself. Self-regulation is the most efficient form of control. No force required. Only visibility of consequences. This is why public shaming is powerful. It signals cost. Even when rare. Even when indirect. People do not need to experience punishment. They only need to witness it. Observation modifies behavior. Machiavelli knew this. Visible consequences create invisible compliance. Now consider information. You believe your opinions are informed. But your exposure determines your framework. What you see shapes what you think is possible. What you never see never enters consideration. Filtered input produces filtered output. And filtered output feels original. Modern systems do not suppress thought aggressively. They saturate attention. Distraction fragments clarity. Fragmented clarity reduces resistance. When attention is scattered, structure becomes invisible. Invisible structure is stable structure. Machiavelli would recognize this as sophisticated governance. Control without spectacle. Influence without force. Comfort without freedom. Because comfort softens awareness. When you are comfortable, you rarely investigate the architecture around you. Architecture shapes movement. Roads guide vehicles without chains. Walls guide direction without commands. Algorithms guide attention without coercion. You scroll voluntarily. But what appears is not random. You choose. But from a curated selection. Curated selection narrows perception. Narrow perception narrows possibility. Possibility defines behavior. Behavior defines outcome. An outcome feels self-created. This is the illusion. Not that you are a puppet, but that you are operating inside a designed environment. Design influences behavior. Behavior reinforces design. The cycle sustains itself. Machiavelli did not romanticize freedom. He analyzed power. Power stabilizes itself. It rewards cooperation. It discourages disruption. It normalizes alignment. Most people do not resist because resistance carries uncertainty. Uncertainty threatens stability. Stability is addictive. It reduces anxiety. Anxiety motivates questioning. Reduce anxiety, reduce questioning. Now look at social belonging. Humans fear isolation more than error. Isolation threatens survival. So opinions shift subtly toward group consensus. You may believe you are expressing truth. But you are also preserving connection. Connection carries weight. Weight influences speech. Speech shapes identity. Identity becomes defended. And defense feels like conviction. But conviction can emerge from protection, not clarity. Machiavelli understood loyalty rarely stems from love. It stems from dependency. Dependency reduces risk. Risk threatens security. Security preserves order. Order preserves power. This is not malevolent. It is mechanical. Human behavior maps incentives. Incentives define range. Range defines freedom. Freedom inside a narrow range still feels expansive. Because comparison is limited. If you never experience broader autonomy, you cannot measure its absence. This is why control is most stable when invisible. Overt oppression creates friction. Friction creates rebellion. Subtle structure creates adaptation. Adaptation creates compliance. Compliance becomes culture. Culture becomes identity. Identity becomes self-defended. Now control is internal. Machiavelli would say this is efficient. The ruler does not need to dominate daily. The system dominates through expectation. Expectation regulates action. Action reinforces structure. The individual believes he is acting freely. But the environment is shaping the decision space. This is architecture. Architecture is not visible like chains. It is embedded in design. In work hours. In economic incentives. In social approval. In digital platforms. In status hierarchies. In reputational systems. You adapt to each one. And adaptation accumulates. Eventually your entire behavior pattern reflects environmental structure. You call this personality. But personality is partially shaped by survival inside systems. If boldness is punished early, caution develops. If compliance is rewarded early, obedience strengthens. Early incentives shape adult identity. Identity then defends its own formation. Machiavelli would not judge this. He would predict it. Because power does not need your agreement. It needs your predictability. Predictable populations are stable. Stability reduces resistance. Resistance requires awareness of alternative structures. Without awareness, adaptation continues uninterrupted. Now consider economic dependency. Income determines stability. Stability determines comfort. Comfort reduces risk-taking. Risk-taking threatens structure. So incentives align to discourage instability. You are free to quit. But quitting carries cost. You are free to dissent. But dissent carries social consequence. You are free to disengage. But disengagement reduces opportunity. Freedom exists. But cost shapes usage. When cost outweighs perceived benefit, behavior aligns with structure. This alignment becomes routine. Routine becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. Identity feels authentic. But it formed under pressure. This is not hopeless. It is clarifying. Because once you see incentives clearly, you can evaluate them consciously. Machiavelli did not preach rebellion. He preached awareness. If you know what shapes you, you can navigate strategically. If you ignore structure, you are shaped unconsciously. Control is not removed by denial. It is weakened by visibility. Ask yourself, what behaviors in your life are driven by fear of exclusion? What opinions are softened to preserve approval? What ambitions were abandoned because stability felt safer? These are not moral failures. They are structural responses. Machiavelli would say realism begins here. Not with anger. Not with blame. But with recognition. You are not powerless. But you are influenced. Influence is constant. Ignoring it increases its effect. Understanding it restores leverage. Leverage does not require rebellion. It requires clarity. Clarity reveals cost. Clarity reveals incentive. Clarity reveals trade-offs. Once visible, you can choose deliberately, instead of reactively. That shift is subtle, but powerful. Because power thrives in unconscious compliance. When compliance becomes conscious, power dynamics shift. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. You begin to see when comfort is exchanged for autonomy. When approval is exchanged for authenticity. When stability is exchanged for exploration. You may still choose stability. But now it is a decision. Not a reflex. Machiavelli would call that strategic living. Operating inside systems without being blind to them. You cannot escape structure entirely. No society functions without it. But you can understand its mechanics. And once you understand mechanics, you stop confusing comfort with control. Control begins with awareness. Awareness disrupts illusion. Illusion sustains complacency. Complacency sustains systems. This is why confusion is powerful. Confusion keeps you reactive. Clarity makes you deliberate. Deliberation slows automatic alignment. Automatic alignment is the foundation of invisible control. The question is not whether you are controlled. The question is whether you understand how. Because understanding changes posture. And posture influences interaction. When you see incentives clearly, you negotiate differently. You evaluate risk differently. You speak differently. Not recklessly, but consciously. That is the difference between existing inside structure and navigating it. Machiavelli never promised moral comfort. He offered strategic clarity. Understand power. Understand incentives. Understand human nature. Then act with awareness. Most people never reach that stage. They remain comfortable inside invisible architecture. They call it freedom. But freedom without awareness is limited. Awareness expands perception. Expanded perception expands possibility. Possibility reshapes behavior. Behavior reshapes outcomes. And outcomes redefine control. This is not dramatic. It is incremental. But incremental shifts accumulate. And accumulated awareness is difficult to reverse. Once you see the architecture, you cannot unsee it. And once you cannot unsee it, you stop mistaking adaptation for autonomy. That is where real leverage begins. Not in rebellion. Not in anger. But in clarity. And clarity is the first real step toward escaping control. Escape the matrix.